want to look at financial reasons that seniors choose to cohabit. And again, we're looking at folks in the 50 plus age bracket. There are concerns about a potential loss of military and pension benefits. There's a concern also that cohabitation permits individuals to or not continue to receive Social Security or pension from a former spouse that they would lose if they were to remarry, right? Again, concerns about remarriage and what that means and how that affects benefits and other financial sources or other streams of income. Another concern has to do with alimony. If you were in a long-term marriage that ended in divorce and you're receiving alimony, you're most likely going to have to give that up when you remarry. Again, you'd have to check the final judgment of divorce, but that certainly is a concern. Another concern is the fear of incurring liability for your partner's medical expenses. You know, that's another reason why people are kind of gun shy about, not getting married. And then the last point in this area is that many higher income couples don't want to face a bigger tax hit. What do I mean? Getting married, if they're both individually pretty high income earners, when they get married, that's going to catapult them to an even higher tax bracket, which could result in a much higher tax burden. So, what are the risks of just living together, right? And first, before I touch on a few of the risks, I want to share two hypotheticals, two scenarios, and see if either one of these two scenarios describes your situation. And those of a certain age may appreciate the John Mellencamp references in this first example. You'll see what I mean in a second. Jack and Diane, a couple in their late 50s, started living together after a year of dating. Diane became a widow in her late 40s after losing her husband to pancreatic cancer. Around that time, Jack and his first wife had gone through a divorce shortly after their youngest child moved out of their home. Neither Jack nor Diane had any desire to remarry, despite the fact that they have amazing intimacy and were really committed to their relationship. It also made financial sense for Jack to move out of the home that he'd been renting since his divorce and into the home that Diane owned with her late husband. 2 years after Jack and Diane began living together, Jack was seriously injured in a construction accident at work. Now, here's the risk. Even though Jack's employer was able to call Diane and let her know what had happened, Diane was unable to get any information from the hospital about Jack's condition. Why? Because she's not his spouse, and he had not prepared an advance directive. Diane had no legal right to get any information or make any medical decisions on Jack's behalf. Their living situation had absolutely no bearing on their legal rights. However, if Jack and Diane had decided to get married, their marital status would have afforded each of them these rights simply based on the fact that they were officially husband and wife. Caveat. With the advance directive, it's always good to have something in writing. Yes, doctors are going to look to a spouse, but let's say if you were married and you didn't want your spouse to be the one making the calls, on whether or not to um, discontinue life-sustaining treatments. It's important to have these things in writing. But Jack and Diane would have had, Diane in this case would have had a stronger leg to stand on, if you will, if Jack had taken the time to put something in writing so that she can have an influence, she can have a say in Jack's care. Now, hypothetical number 2 has to do with Harry and Sally. Sally is older and wealthier than Harry. Sally is a retired doctor, and Harry is a photojournalist who is 10 years younger than her. They have a mutual understanding that Sally is going to support their lifestyle, which consists of traveling and fine dining. And then suddenly, Sally becomes ill and can no longer manage the couple's finances. Here's the risk. Under this scenario, unless Sally had given Harry a financial power of attorney, Sally's assets will probably be frozen by her financial institutions, her banks, and so forth. Harry won't be able to access them. In addition, you might have to get the courts involved to unfreeze assets or perhaps appoint a guardian to manage those funds. And that's all going to take time, and it's going to take money. Without an appropriate, any kind of advanced planning on Sally's part, courts are generally forced to rely on perhaps a next of kin to fill in financial and medical decision-making roles. Harry could even be evicted if the home that they're living in was owned exclusively by Sally, who's now ill and no longer able to manage their finances, right? So let me pause here. Can anybody relate to either Jack and Diane's story or Harry and Sally's? Some of you may, or at least in part. Now, what are some of the other risks that are involved when we're talking about folks who are over 50, cohabiting, unmarried, right? So I'm going to